Okay, it seems like folks might be logged in. Maybe we'll have a few more join us, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you all to SCORE Southwest Missouri's Tuesdays at 2 webinar series. Our webinar today is Continuity for Business with Katelyn Kovach from the Springfield-Greene County Office of Emergency Management. Before I turn it over to Katie, I'd like to talk just a little bit about SCORE and the library and let you know what to expect from our webinar today. So this webinar is presented in partnership with the Springfield-Greene County Library District. I should introduce myself, I guess. My name is Katie Pattison. I am the workshop chair, outgoing workshop chair for SCORE Southwest Missouri, and I also work for the Springfield-Greene County Library District. If you were not aware that the library offers resources for business, I want to let you know that we do. If you don't live here in Springfield, do check with your library. Many libraries offer resources like we do. These are things like market and consumer research databases. We have a very cool database that you can use with your library card called Demographics Now. So if you are looking to gather demographics about the area, consumer spending, even traffic at certain intersections, this is a pretty amazing database. We have meeting and co-working spaces. We have a maker space with a vinyl cutter, laser engraver, heat press, podcasting equipment, and more. And of course, you already know that the library offers books and audiobooks, newspapers, magazines, and we offer most of these things in both print and digital formats. And then we offer workshops and events just like this one, both in person and virtually for businesses and entrepreneurs. You can find more out about any of that at thelibrary.org/business. A few little details about today's workshop. I'll be your moderator today, so I'll kind of be in the background. If you have questions, you can send me a private chat, any questions about technology or anything like that. Love to have you introduce yourself in the chat. Some of you already have. Welcome, Darren and Kenneth. Tell us who you are and who you're with, what organization you're with, and what you're hoping to learn today if you'd like. This webinar will last about an hour, including time for questions at the end. You can add your questions to the chat or the Q&A throughout. If we have some kind of pauses in there, we can answer some of those specific questions, but if we don't get to them during the workshop, we will definitely get to them at the end. Everyone who's registered for the workshop today will receive an email within about a week of the event that includes a recording of the event. And I don't think we have any handouts today, but if we did, we would send those along too. You'll also receive an evaluation email from SCORE. If you could take just a minute to fill that out, that helps us to plan for future workshops. And now just a quick intro to SCORE. So if you're not familiar with SCORE, SCORE is a nationwide nonprofit with funding from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and they have services for you that are there for the life of your business. Those services include free business advice and mentoring. So you can get a SCORE mentor, request a SCORE mentor, and that service is free. Our mentors are volunteers with lots of different experience in lots of different industries right here in Southwest Missouri and in other parts of the country. If we don't have a mentor that fits your needs around here in Southwest Missouri, you have access to mentors nationwide. We also offer low or no cost business training, just like this workshop you're in right now. We often partner with the Springfield-Greene County Library for that. You can check out our list of upcoming workshops at swmissouri.score.org, or you can look at all the workshops available nationally at just score.org. There's some really great stuff out there. Whatever business topic you can think of, there's probably a SCORE workshop that has been done or is coming up about it, especially those basic business topics. So whatever you're wondering, definitely check out the SCORE website. And also on the SCORE website, there are lots of free business templates and resources. So if you need to do financial projections, continuity planning, insurance planning, marketing planning, all that kind of stuff, there's some really great resources that are free for you to download there on the SCORE website. This is just a couple of the upcoming workshops that we have. One kind of inspirational one coming up on May 20th, or excuse me, that says May 23rd, but that should say June 23rd. So correct that in your mind. Closing Your Gap, Gratitude, Attitude, and Passion with Doug Hunt, who is with the Joplin Area Chamber of Commerce. And then we have a great franchise workshop this summer. So if anybody is considering franchising, Carl Gerhardt is a SCORE mentor, came from the Las Vegas chapter of SCORE and lives here in Southwest Missouri now and has been a franchise consultant for many years. So he's got some great info if you're thinking about franchising at all, definitely want to attend that one. That's on July 18th at the Library Center. You can see the website right there, swmissouri.score.org is where you can sign up for any of those workshops. And lastly, everything SCORE does is made possible through the effort of volunteers nationwide. We have over 10,000 volunteers in over 1,500 communities across the US. If you have any interest in volunteering, you can take mentors, planning workshops. We have an amazing entrepreneurial women's conference that we do in the fall. It's really a fun group to be a part of and kind of make connections in our entrepreneurial community here in Springfield. You can sign up to help or learn more about that at score.org. Here's that contact info one more time. And now I would like to introduce our presenter. So Katelyn Kovach began working with the Office of Emergency Management in June 2022 as the Area Municipalities Planner. In that position, she provides contracted Greene County municipalities and school systems with emergency operations plans per their individual agreements. She develops new plans as needed and keeps ongoing plans up to date with timely revisions. And she also participates in the Watch Officer program, oversees the OEM volunteer and internship program, and participates in office-wide operations and response efforts when necessary. Prior to joining OEM, Mrs. Kovac worked for the Assemblies of God National Office for 6 years, where she helped develop the award-winning 461 response program to coordinate and deploy AG resources nationwide in times of crisis. She also developed emergency plans for houses of worship, and in conjunction with the Senior Director of Chaplaincy, developed and wrote the first official emergency response protocols for the AG National Office. Ms. Kovac and her husband live in Springfield, Missouri, and they have one child. Welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I will stop sharing my screen here so that you can turn it over to you. I'm going to pop off my camera and let Katie take over here, but I will be on chat if anyone needs anything. So.
All right, let me see if I can get this going here.
Looks good.
All right, awesome. My window so I can see how it's going. There we go. Got it back up. All right. So thank you for the introduction. As Katie said, I work for the Springfield-Greene County Office of Emergency Management. I provide plans for 6 different municipalities and 2 school systems. So I'm happy to be here talking about continuity for business planning today. You could see at the bottom of the screen that's currently up now, our motto for OEM is that our vision is to be the most disaster resilient community in America. So that's part of why I'm really happy to be here talking about this, because our businesses are a huge factor in the resiliency of our community, and having a continuity of operations plan, having a plan for if a disaster happens before it happens will help make your business more resilient, which in turn help reinforce the resiliency of our community. So to start off, something like this you often see at the end of slides, but I wanted to have it at the beginning because most of the information that will be in this presentation is from a website called Readygov. This has been developed by FEMA to help promote community resilience. It's a great resource. I highly encourage anyone to check it out at the end of this. You could see a list of some of the other things that they can help provide. And like I said, a lot of this information is coming from this source, so you will see a lot of what I'm about to talk about today included, but they have a lot of other more detailed plans to help with some of the stuff that I'm not going to have time to go over. So they also have stuff to talk about general readiness for different types of disaster, different media packages that you can use, various things like that. So highly recommend checking out that source. So quick roadmap of this presentation. This is kind of what we're going to go over while I'm talking today. So we'll look at what exactly a business continuity of operations plan is. Why do we need one? Overview of the planning process, the 4 different steps involved, sort of a review of what we've discussed to make sure it's kind of all lining up, and then next steps to go and create your own continuity of operations plan. So what is a business continuity of operations plan, or a COOP? We talk a lot about COOP plans in emergency management. We have them for whole communities as well as individual government systems. We highly recommend businesses have their own plan. They can sometimes be referred to as continuity of business plans. We use continuity of operations a lot, so I will be referring to it as a COOP plan for your business. One of the fun things in emergency management is we often say, don't use acronyms so we don't confuse people, and then we use acronyms everywhere. So, and I am no exception to that rule, so I will at least try to define every acronym I'm going to use, so you know what I'm talking about as I refer to it. So a COOP plan is basically an essential step to post-disaster recovery. It helps you know what to do after something unexpected happens. Organizing this ahead of time will let you start recovering as soon as possible so you can get back up and running as quickly as you can, hopefully with minimal impacts to your business. So it is a pre-designed roadmap or set of policies to help you get going again. It should be flexible enough to apply to a variety of disasters, including both natural and man-made. We always advocate an all hazards sliding scale approach to really all emergency management planning, but especially continuity of operations planning. The benefit to this is that you don't have to worry about, well, I have a plan for a tornado, but I don't have a plan for an ice storm. Instead, if you take a sort of all hazards approach, you sort of look at the individual resources that you need to keep your business going and what to do if those resources are impacted. So for example, if you can't get to your office, it doesn't matter if it's an ice storm, a flood, or if a tornado took out the building. The point is your office is now inaccessible. What do you do? And if you do that for your individual resources that you need, then it helps, regardless of what the plan is, regardless of what the disaster is. So, and having a sliding scale really helps as well, because then you can apply it to, something as small as, power went out, and something as large as, everything's been destroyed by a tornado. Now, what do I do? A continuity of operations plan also can be applied to a variety of scenarios. It doesn't always have to be like a massive disaster. One of the classes I was in, someone was talking about how they pulled out their COOP plan when a skunk got into their offices because they couldn't work there. So they had to figure out, now what do we do? So it's having this in place can really help, with a variety of different situations that might come up that might impact why your business can't function like usual, regardless of what is causing that disruption. It takes into consideration important factors to minimize lost revenues, maximize profits. A lot of these factors could include, your people and processes that you need to function, physical facilities, critical product equipment, production equipment, and IT systems and data. So why need a COOP plan? The first is it helps you be prepared. So post-disaster is not the time to try to figure out what to do. Emotions are high, communication is challenging, and resources are limited. So we like to refer to things as blue sky days and gray sky days. Our blue sky days are when, a disaster is not happening. It's pretty much operations like normal. So if you plan during your blue sky days, you think about it now while you have time, then on your gray sky days when things, are falling apart, unexpected things are happening, you already have a starting point. You're not trying to figure out in the middle of chaos, where do I even begin? Having a COOP plan can help you protect your reputation. If your operations are disrupted, you can lose your reputation with your customers as a reliable business. It's nice to think that if a disaster happens, people will be understanding of why you're not able to provide the normal services you are. But the reality is a lot of times if you have a disruption in the services you provide that people are used to expecting, they might not think or remember, the perfectly valid reasons for this disruption. Instead, they might just remember, oh, I went to use the service this one time and they weren't providing it. I'm not going to go back to those people. I can't trust them to provide what I need when I need it. Having a COOP plan can also help protect your sales and revenue. The sooner you get up and running again after a disaster, the faster you can keep fulfilling orders or providing services. This is essential because your insurance won't cover all of your cost of lost business, and it can't replace customers that go looking for service elsewhere. So it's definitely good to have insurance. But a lot of people sometimes think, oh, I don't need a plan for if something happens. I have insurance. They're just going to come in, give me my money. I'll get up and running again in no time. But business can take a while. Getting stuff replaced can take a while. And if you lose, your production, if you lose your customers in the meantime, your insurance isn't going to be able to make up for that shortfall. So that leads us to keeping customers. If you have to stop providing a service for a while, your customers will go find that service somewhere else. And they might not come back if they find someone else who can provide the same service or goods that you do. They're just going to keep doing what's easiest, what they're used to. They might not come and check back and see if you're up and running again. So the faster you can recover from a disaster, the better chance you have of keeping that customer base. Writing a COOP plan can actually help you improve your business now. The process of going through and looking at how you operate, how your business functions, can help you figure out different ways that you can improve what you're doing now and not just how to get back up and running after a disaster. And it can help you avoid lawsuits and legal liability. If you have contracts in place to provide certain goods and you have to breach that contract, you can be liable for that, even if it is, for, again, a perfectly good reason. If you're not able to demonstrate that you made a concentrated effort to account for such circumstances, if you have to breach contracts, you can still be liable. You can be potentially liable for damages to neighboring property or injury or death of employees if you have employees in your business. So a COOP is really important to help protect you from these possible things that could come up that are in addition to the loss of business that you could see. All right, so a general overview of the continuity of operations planning process, and we'll go through each of these step by step, but the first step is conduct a business impact analysis. That will help inform your recovery strategies, which will help you write your actual plan, and then you move on to testing and exercising the plan. And I will say, as we're going through this, the first part, the business impact analysis, is the most involved. So we're going to spend a little while talking about that. And if it seems like we're going on forever, don't worry, not every step will take that long. So I don't want you to get halfway through and be like, wow, she's got like 5 slides on this. We're never going to get through this whole presentation. So I'll try to keep it moving as much as possible. So first step, business impact analysis. So it helps predict the consequences of a major disruption, essentially. It can identify time-sensitive or critical functions, how to keep them running uninterrupted, looks at potential loss scenarios, and will provide your basis for recovery, prevention, and mitigation strategies. Basically, it's going to help you evaluate if something happens that disrupts your business in one way or another, and we'll look at specifics of how that could happen. How is that going to impact your ability to provide your service, to get your goods out, your shipping, your communication with your customers, and what consequences is that going to have both in practical terms and financially. So first, you'll start by looking at different potential business disruption scenarios. These are kind of the different ways that your business might be impacted. So physical damage to building or buildings is obvious. Damage or breakdown of machinery, systems, or equipment, restricted access to a site or building, interruption of the supply chain. These are all things that can affect your ability to provide your services. This supply chain especially can include failure of a supplier to get the materials you need. So it's not even necessarily your ability to ship out what you make to your customers, but if you provide a service directly, you might not be able to get the goods that you need in order to turn around and provide your service. So you'll need to look at what that interruption of transportation might do to the services that you're trying to provide. And again, as we're taking an all hazards approach, it helps to just look at interruption of transportation. So that could be flooded roads or roads covered in ice from an ice storm. Either way, you can't get what you need or you can't ship out what you need to ship out. How is that going to impact you? And then eventually we'll look at what you can do to help plan to overcome that. Utility outage, such as electrical, power, losing water to the building can cause problems. If you are the kind of business that has employees, or even if you run like a coffee shop or something where you have customers coming into your buildings, if for some reason the water has to be turned off because city utilities needs to work on the water lines, you can't keep running, indefinitely or all day without power. People need to use the bathroom. You need to have water to make the coffee. So how would something like that affect what you need to provide to your customers? Loss or corruption of information technology can have a huge impact on just about any type of business, and potential absentee of essential employees. Um, it's really important to have redundancy in roles if you have employees. So if you have one person who knows how to operate a certain machine, or one person who has the key to a certain storeroom, and they're not available, then what are you going to do? You need to think not just if you don't have manpower in general, but also who is trained in which roles, who has the authority to, approve certain things, and what are you going to do if those people aren't available. As much as possible, we like to encourage cross-training a lot of employees so they have the knowledge they need to perform in different roles. So again, if certain people aren't available, your whole operation doesn't shut down. Potential impacts that these kind of disruptions can have. So obviously lost or delayed sales and income, increased expenses. This can be referring to having to pay overtime to get your business up and running again. If you get shut down and you need people to work longer hours to get things back up, how much is that going to cost you? Do you have the kind of cushion you need to be able to pay that in the long term? If you need to outsource different facets of your business because you can't do it right now, but you need to still be able to provide things to your customers to keep things going. Do you have the financial resources in place to be able to do that? If you need to expedite orders once you get things up and running again, so there are different expenses that are included in something like this that's more than just like replacing office equipment or repairing buildings or things like that. Potential regulatory fines. Again, if you find yourself unable to fulfill certain, requirements, you might be facing some of those. So how is that going to impact you financially? Which again goes into contractual penalties or even loss of bonuses. If your business, if you're expecting to have like a surge in business around certain times of the year, around certain holidays, and a disaster happens, or even just something small enough to throw off your normal operations, and you aren't able to keep up with that production, or you have to stop offering your service until you can get up and running again, and it happens during this time period when you're expecting to have a boost in income, how is that going to affect your overall finances if you were expecting this? And customer dissatisfaction or defection, we kind of already talked about. Potential delay of new business plans. If you're looking at expanding, or if you're looking at, launching a new collection or something like that, or, furthering your business in one way or another, and then something happens that sets you back, you need to focus on getting things back up and running to normal standards again, how is that going to impact any potential new business you had in mind, especially if you already have a certain sunk cost going into this new business, and then you're not able to launch things when you expected. And then timing and duration of the incident, of the disruption. Again, if you're just disrupted for a couple hours, that may not impact you very much. If you're disrupted for a day or two, well, how is that going to impact? If it happens during the business week, your business may or may not be impacted as much as if it happens over the weekend, depending on what service you provide. Or again, if it happens over a holiday or a big spending time when you're expecting your business to go up, that could have a potentially higher impact than you're expecting as well. So these are all things to think about as you're looking at conducting this impact analysis. So going into it, doing the actual business impact analysis now. The main focus of this is going to be developing questionnaires. This will help you evaluate, the potential impacts of the disruption scenarios that we just discussed, and help you identify the most vulnerable functions or processes in your business, and will focus on critical areas of functionality, critical processes, and financial material resources needed to keep these things going. Your questionnaires will help give you insight into how your business is currently running. And you're going to want to give them out if you have employees, if you have team members, especially if you have like different management teams or leads of different areas of like production or customer service or administration. You know, distributing these questionnaires will really help you learn from their insight and their knowledge and the specific areas where they work, and give you a general overview of what your business is currently doing now, and how it can be impacted by a disaster or any kind of event that disrupts your normal operations. Even if it's just you, even if you don't have employees or you don't have anyone else you work with, you're a business of one, I still highly suggest that you develop a questionnaire. It might seem a little redundant because you're just asking yourself these questions, but taking the time to sit down and write out what could possibly impact my business. How can it be disrupted? What is this going to do to my different systems that I need to keep going so I can provide my service? Taking the time to write these things out as it pertains to your particular business, and then taking the time to write out your answers is really going to help you have a better insight into what you're doing. It's going to help you better fill out the worksheets that we're going to talk about in a minute, and then eventually your continuity of operations plan. So even if it's just yourself, you might feel kind of silly sitting down and writing questions for yourself, but I still highly encourage that you do it. If you do have people that you're giving these questionnaires out to, you should start by doing a workshop or some sort of seminar to inform people on how to fill them out, give them an overview of what it's for, what they're doing, basically context so they know how to fill this out, and before you actually just hand it to people. Also, hopefully you can help impart the necessity of this. People do not like filling out paperwork, and a lot of times, even if they're your employees and you give them a questionnaire, it can end up on the bottom of the to-do list. So hopefully doing a little seminar ahead of time to inform them of why this is important will help you actually get your results better. So collect and analyze your results, and then of course ask follow-up questions and conduct interviews if you need to clarify answers or fill in any gaps. Again, people don't like filling out paperwork. Even if they fill it out and give it back to you, a lot of times you can end up with like very short answers or not a lot of detail. This is definitely something where you want to follow up with that. Don't just leave it at, we need computers to keep doing administrative work. You need details in order to make sure your continuity of operations plan is actually effective. You need to know what is needed to work, how things work, and what will happen if you don't have, the certain equipment that you need, or the utilities that you're used to, or the buildings that you're used to. So definitely follow up on those details. And then you will take all of the information that you get from these questionnaires and consolidate them into a business impact analysis report. This report will be written using the worksheet and a business impact analysis worksheet and a resource requirements worksheet. I'll show you examples of those here in a minute. So essentially, this is a business impact analysis worksheet. What you're going to do is when you take your questionnaires, these two worksheets we're looking at will then help you interpret and frame the answers that you get in a way that will help you write your impact analysis report the way that is most effective and will give you the most information that you need to eventually write your continuity of operations plan. So this is a really simple worksheet. Again, it's available at ready.gov. So you can see the little Ready Business logo at the top. And it just looks at your timing and duration, operational impacts, and financial impact. And you can see underneath they have examples. So for the different timing, if the impact is less than an hour, if it's more than an hour, less than 8, between 8 hours and 24, 24 and 72, greater than 72 hours, greater than a week, greater than a month. How are these things going to be impacted? And then there's examples of operational impacts, and then again, your financial impact. So the answers you get from your questionnaires will help you determine, what goes in this worksheet to know what operations you have that are critical and how they're going to be impacted by different durations and what the financial impact will be if, say, your production has to slow down or you can't get the ingredients you need to make the cookies that you sell or something along those lines. And then this is an example of a resource requirement worksheet. So this again will help you look at specifics of, office equipment that we need. Well, different furniture, phones, fax, copiers. How many do we usually have? How many will we need in these timeframes following a disaster? I also highly encourage you don't hesitate to adjust these forms to fit your needs. So, the previous one we looked at, relatively straightforward. If that works for you, great, use it. If you need more detail, if you have a more complicated business, if you have different facets of your business that you need to do these for, you can always tailor these things to your needs. Every business is different, so every plan is going to be different. And the process of writing every plan is going to be different. All right, so moving on to step 2, our recovery strategies. So the recovery strategy is basically going to use information from the worksheets that we just talked about and from the questionnaires to help you determine the resources that you will need following a disaster, what resources that you might have already on hand, like redundant systems to help fulfill those requirements, and what you might not have on hand that you need to start planning for now. So this is called gap analysis. This is a big part of figuring out your recovery strategy. So we'll focus on restoring your business to minimum operational levels. Obviously the goal is to be back up and running at full power as soon as you can. But when you're looking specifically at your recovery strategies, you want to focus on what do you need to get back up and running, minimal level to be able to keep providing your services, keep fulfilling your contracts, keep your finances at the level that you expect them to, and not lose your customers. And then the priority of your recovery strategies is going to be based on information from your business impact analysis report. So basically, you're going to want to prioritize which functions need to happen first, which resources you need to get first, based on this most significant financial impact. So if you do a lot of stuff, if all of your stuff is on computers, then obviously having redundant systems for your computers, having a backup for that is going to be your number one priority when you're looking at what can I afford to have set up for these resources that I'll need after a disaster. If a lot of your stuff is more hands-on, if you use manufacturing equipment and that's your biggest area of impact, like if that goes down and you're going to suffer the most financially from not having that, then that should be your focus when you're looking on your resource requirements. You're going to want to look at what you can afford to do both now and after a disaster happens. So it's great to come up with, recovery strategies that have all of these extra redundant systems and all of these, contracted services on standby. But if you can't afford all of that, then it's not realistic. So you want to look at what you can afford to do now before a disaster happens to make you more resilient, and then what money you can have set aside for after something happens that disrupts your normal operating procedures. And then you have that pool of money to be able to quickly get the resources you need. Now, keep in mind, you don't want to plan to order things like immediately after a disaster. If something has happened on a large scale and it's impacting a lot of people, you don't want to think, well, I'm just going to order new equipment and I'll get it in no time. Unexpected result of COVID was a lot of computer chips were suddenly in short supply, which ended up impacting both car sales and various computers. Again, nobody could really predict that moving, forward. But if you have in mind, oh, I need this computer, I need computer systems to be able to function on a certain level, don't plan to just be able to order it, because even if it's something that impacts you locally, you're not sure if something like COVID will end up impacting globally. You don't know what the scale is going to be. Again, this is why we do the all hazards scalable approach. So whatever your recovery strategy is, try to have it be reliant on things you can either get now or things that will be available to you if something is disrupted on a large scale. So different types of recovery strategies. You'll need various strategies to cover different resource requirement gaps. Things you should consider when you're looking at your different types of strategies. So again, first is scale that we were just talking about. If you have several manufacturing machines and one of your machines go down and the rest of your machines can keep going, the scale is pretty small. You don't have that resource gap that we talked about. There's really not a lot you need to do in your plan other than say, if this machine goes down, these machines will take over. But if your scale gets a little bit bigger, if several of your machines go down, or if all of your machines go down, or you can't access your machines for some reason, then you have that resource gap. And then you need to figure out, well, what do I do if it gets that big? Where do I find these backups? Third-party contractors. So these can really help fill in some of these gaps that we've been talking about. We often talk about establishing an MOU or a memorandum of understanding. And you can have these set up with other businesses or organizations. And often you can do a sort of reciprocal one where you say, hey, if my machines go down, if my buildings go down, can we come and use yours? And having this in place ahead of time will have them say, yes, you can. And you'll sort out the details of what that will look like in writing before you get to the point of needing to do that. Because obviously there's a lot of potential confusion that could happen there. There's a lot of potential liability that can come up if you're sharing space. But if you take time to sort these out ahead of time, then if your processes get disrupted, it's a lot easier to just kind of switch over. And then if you have sort of a mutual understanding one, then it's the same thing the other way. If their services get disrupted, then you already have an understanding that they can come and use your services. So third-party contractors can really be an important resource when you're looking at potential recovery strategies. So telecommuting, obviously, we all did a lot of this during COVID. This is a great option if it's available, if you have employees that can work from home. Depending on what your business is, it might not be the kind of thing that can be done from home. But if you have, customer service side of things or administration, order processing, if telecommuting is an option, definitely consider that and look at what is needed for your employees to keep doing that. These days, most people have a laptop or a tablet or a desktop or some way of continuing their job from home, but not everyone is willing to. They might expect you to provide something to be used for business instead of wanting to use their own stuff, or whatever they have might not be enough to keep up with what you need to operate on a business level, or they might not have certain software in place that you need them to use. So think ahead now of if you are going to use telecommuting as a backup for one of your recovery strategies, what do you need to equip your employees with before you get to that point? And then again, alternate sites, if you don't have access to your normal buildings, where are you going to go? If you can't telecommute, or if it's, too impractical to do so, where can you operate out of? So like one of the things you can do is like look around for hotels, and you can't necessarily establish an MOU with a hotel ahead of time because they need to be open for customers. But if you do your research now, then you find, there's 3 hotels in these 3 different parts of the city. So if one part is impacted but another's not, we have backups. They have the space we need if it's available, and we can afford to rent out that space. Now you have your research in place. So if something does happen and you need to find an alternate site to work out of, you get a jump on everyone else who might potentially be looking for alternate sites because you already have this list of places that can work for you. You can start calling up and saying, hey, are you available? Great, we're going to come and rent out your rooms and come work from there. Alternate sites can also include like if you have multiple buildings in your business and you have cafeteria space or you have break room space, things like that can be repurposed to be office space or conference rooms or things like that. So take a look at what is available to you. And again, I know this could, businesses here can be a single person business, or you could be looking at a large scale. But if you have multiple sites available to you, if you have multiple buildings, look at what you have now and look at how that could potentially be repurposed if different buildings either are damaged or, again, don't have power or water, or simply can't be gotten to because of flooded streets or streets covered in ice, or if there's a tree down or something like that. And then manual workarounds are also really important to consider when looking at your recovery strategies. If your power goes out, if your normal automated processes go down, how can you establish a manual workaround so you can keep going and keep providing your services and keep providing, for your customers? So examples of this can include, handwritten notes instead of using software programs, or having printed out order forms. If you're used to, customers being able to fill in orders online, if you can print these forms out again ahead of time, don't wait until after disasters happen, because if you, lose access to your normal programs, you might not be able to print these out. But if you have a stack of order forms printed out ahead of time and employees that can still take orders over the phone and fill these forms out by hand, that's a way to keep going with a sort of manual workaround. So what you really want to do to make sure you have these manual workarounds set up as effectively as possible is identify different steps that you have in automated processes. Again, whether it's online orders or you have a product that you manufacture and deliver, take a close look at every step of your process, what is normally automated, and then look for areas where manual workarounds can be established. You'll want to record in writing the proper process for a manual workaround and the proper procedure if you're switching from your normal automated processes. And again, have this all sorted out in your COOP plan ahead of time. So if something happens, you can pull it out and say, okay, here are the steps. You don't want, if you're switching over to a manual process when you're used to automated processes, it can get really easy for, forms to get lost. If there is a chain of approvals that needs to go through, it can miss someone. If people aren't sure what they're supposed to be doing, it can turn into a disaster of paperwork that can be hard to recover from. So you want to make sure you have not just how you're going to work around your lack of automation figured out, but also have it written down, the process that you're going to use. All right, so some potential manufacturing strategies. So if you're a business that manufactures things, these are potential strategies for, recovering if your processes are impacted, shifting production from one facility to another, increasing your manufacturing output at different operational facilities. If you make multiple items, if you can focus from making one item to another, is that a potential option for you? Do you have the equipment in place to be able to do that? Can you prioritize your production either by profit margin or customer relation? So again, if you make multiple different items, multiple different products, and you have some that don't sell as well as others, or some that your customers, it's your main seller, it's a thing that people know you for, can you shift your priority to that to keep that going, even if it means having to fall behind on things that don't make you as much money or don't maintain that relationship quite as well? Maintaining a higher, inventory of finished goods or raw materials can help sort of bridge those gaps that we talk about. If you can't get what you're used to, if there's disruptions to the supply chain, or you can't ship your stuff out, or you can't manufacture quite as fast, reallocating your existing inventory, limiting orders if you realize you just can't keep up with things, then you want to make sure that you're limiting your order size or quantity so you're not agreeing to provide something to people that you simply can't do. Again, contracting with third parties to maybe help fill some of these gaps, either in equipment, or if there's, someone who can help you, contract out some of your manufacturing so you can keep meeting your orders. And of course, purchasing business interruption insurance is always a good idea. As we said, your insurance isn't going to cover everything that could happen if you have a major disruption, but it is still a very good idea to have it. So here are some questions to look at when you're considering these potential workarounds for interruption in manufacturing. Because again, it's not enough to just come up with, a great pie in the sky idea for a recovery strategy. You want to make sure it's actually viable and feasible and something you can afford to do. So will there be a facility available if you're looking at shifting to other facilities? How much time will it take to shift product production if you're shifting from making one thing to another? What is the cost of doing something like that? If you're displacing your product production, if you're focusing on your more popular things instead of your least popular things, you're still going to lose some revenue. So what's the revenue loss? Is that something you can absorb? And how long can you absorb that? How much extra time does it take to receive materials or ship goods if there's a disruption in the supply chain? Will that impact customer relationships if you need to, put out how long your production is or how long your shipping time is? Are there regulations that could restrict this idea of shifting your production? If you're regulated to only make a certain kind of product, you might not be able to shift to something else as easily if there's different requirements in place that you need to be sure you meet. Are there potential quality control issues that could arise if you shift your production or if you outsource it? If you're looking at going to a third party and outsourcing some of your production, you want to make sure the people you're using can meet the standards that your customers are used to seeing from you. You don't want to have a drop in your business because, you might still be shipping them the things that they expect, but now it's suddenly falling apart, or the colors are wrong, or things are misaligned. And are there long-term consequences associated basically with any of these strategies? Any of the strategies that you're looking at for potential recovery, you want to look at the long-term consequences, both practically and financially. All right, so finally we get to plan development. So this is where you write your continuity of operations plan or your business continuity plan. So you want to start by developing a framework. So this basically will look at details of what you already know you need to function. It'll be, your normal functioning processes, organizational charts, distribution plans, information about your teams, insurance information, what raw materials do you already need at this point, supply list, critical software to keep functions, processes going, contact details for teams, for providers, for customers. Basically, you want a snapshot of on a blue sky day when everything is working the way it's supposed to, what do we need? What is required? Then you want to start by organizing your recovery teams. These will usually be based on, again, this is looking at if you have employees or you have other people you work with, they're already going to kind of be in their relevant teams. So it'll usually be like your IT team or your administrative team or your leadership team or your manufacturing team. But while you're writing your COOP plan, you want to write this down. Write down the different roles that are in different teams so you can know, when something happens and you start assigning what different teams should be doing to help recover, there is written down who should be doing what. As a planner, we love writing everything down. If it's not written down, it does not exist. So again, and that's part of why you want to write down your framework as well. You might think, oh, I know off the top of my head what I need for my business to function, so I don't need to write that down. But if a disaster happens, it's really easy to forget stuff, especially if it's a high impact disaster, or if you have people coming to help you. If it's not written down, might as well not exist. So write it all down. You want to consider any relocation plans. So what we already talked about, if you're looking at shifting your manufacturing or secondary sites to set up offices, you want to have all of this information in place, written down before you start, or as you start writing your COOP. You want to have it in place as you're writing your plan so you can work it in and make sure it is recorded in the best way possible to help make your plan easy to follow and make sure your plan is comprehensive. So when you finally get to writing your disaster recovery procedures or your continuity of operation plan, you'll use your business impact analysis report that we talked about already, the different worksheets that we talked about, the resource recovery strategies that you identified, and any of the manual workarounds that we already discussed. So, and then you'll combine that with, again, your framework, your teams, your relocation plans. Once you have this all written out in a document, be sure to obtain any necessary approvals. So again, if it's just you've approved your plan, you're good. Definitely want to at least proofread it or run it through Grammarly, but that's probably all you need to do. But if you have like a board you report to, or if you have partners you work with, you want to make sure that your plan is approved and everyone knows what the plan is before it comes time to use it, because you don't want to think that you understand what your policies are and you've written your plan to take these into account, and now suddenly you go to do it and you don't have the approval of the authority to make that change, and your whole plan falls apart and now you're back to square one. You also need to update your plans regularly. Once your continuity of operation plan is written, it is a living document and it needs to be regularly updated. You cannot just write it and stick it in a drawer, because 3 years down the line, people will have changed, teams will have gotten bigger or smaller, your manufacturing needs may have changed, and now suddenly you pull your plan out and what you have written down doesn't at all take into account what is currently needed for your business. So in emergency management, with the plans I write, we look at doing an annual update. So at least once a year, we update contact information, we update procedures and policies, and then every 5 years, do a complete cover to cover rewrite, look through your plan with a fine tooth comb, make sure it still reflects the reality of your business now. It reflects any memorandums of understanding that you may, develop, or that you may have had in the past, but you don't have now. Make sure it all lines up. If you don't keep your plan up to date, it's really going to be kind of useless after a year, but really it could be shorter if you have big changes in your business before you get to that point. So finally, our final step is testing and exercise. So again, it's easy to write a plan and you've done a lot of research that's gone into writing your plan, but unless you test it, you really have no way of knowing if it's going to work until you are in a disaster situation or in a situation where your processes are disrupted, at which point that is not the time you want to be trying to retool or redesign your plan. So you definitely want to test it, you want to exercise it, make sure it's viable, make sure it'll work the way you expect it to. So a good exercise, you start by developing your requirements and goals. So write out, for this exercise, what are we looking at? You don't necessarily need to exercise your entire continuity of operations plan in one go. If you have a big business, if you have lots of different teams, if you have lots of different processes that are involved, you can exercise one step at a time. You can do testing for each individual team or one big test that includes all the teams at once. You want to make sure that you do exercise your entire plan together to make sure it all works, but it doesn't have to be all at the same time. You can do smaller tests with individual systems and then do one larger test to see how it all works together. As you're doing these tests and these exercises, absolutely document your results. You want to write down how it went. In emergency management, we talk about after action reports. We use these for every exercise that we do. And it's essentially looking at the goals that we established. Did we meet those goals? Were there any challenges to meeting those goals? Were there any problems that were identified during the exercise that were not covered in the COOP plan? What do we need to change moving forward? And then make those changes. Update your plan to reflect lessons learned during your testing and exercise. So different types of tests. There's really three main ones that you'll probably use, and it is suggested that you do it in this order because it kind of makes things work smoothest for the people that are involved in this. So the first is like a seminar or a presentation. This will be where you bring the people together, bring your teams together that are going to be involved in this exercise and talk them through the plan. If you try to test someone on a plan that they don't know, I can tell you the answer right now. They don't know. It's not going to work very well because they don't know what they're supposed to do. So you want to start out with the presentation to sort of train people on what's in the plan. Then you can move to a tabletop exercise. So we like to do these a lot. They're really useful. Basically, you sit around at a table and you have a hypothetical scenario of, a tornado has hit this building, this part of our manufacturing plant, or an ice storm has happened and we can't access these things and power is out. What do we do? And then you bring all your people together, you have them go around and say, at this phase, we're 2 hours in, these different processes are impacted. What do we do to recover? Now we're 5 or 8 hours in, now this next step has happened in this scenario. Now, how do we recover? So it gives you a way to sort of test your plan by just kind of sitting around and talking through it. And then you can always do full scale exercises. These aren't used as frequently when it comes to business operation plan, but it's still not a bad idea, especially if you have a bigger business. And this is kind of more of an actual walkthrough of, if you say, if we don't have access to our main building, we're going to set up in this warehouse. actually practice that process, practice transitioning, what is going to actually be involved in packing up all of your stuff and getting all of your files together and moving everything. Perhaps in the process, you realize you don't have all of the trucks you need to move everything. Or if you plan on switching your manufacturing from one machine to another, actually do a run of that in a full scale exercise. And you might identify that that's not as easy as you expected it to be. So these different types of tests will really help you figure out if your COOP plan is viable before you have to use it. And then again, you always want to work in any changes that need to happen or any areas where you're lacking into your plan before you get to the point of having to use it and then realize that it doesn't cover everything you need it to. All right, so that is essentially your planning process. This little chart kind of gives you an overview of what we talked about. So everything in red was your business impact analysis step. So your disruption scenarios and the potential impacts that you come up with, those will influence the questionnaires you write. Your questionnaires, you send those out, the information you get back on them are going to be reinterpreted and reframed in your business impact analysis worksheet, in your resource requirement worksheet. All of this will influence your business impact analysis report. That report will help you come up with recovery strategies. Your recovery strategies will help you write your COOP plan, which is a little redundant because it's continuity of operations planning plan, but that's just how we refer to things sometimes. And then training, testing, exercising your plan will help you know if it's viable. And really you can add a little extra arrow loop there because once you test it, you'll design your COOP plan if there's anything you need to add, and then test it again. And then if that identifies anything else that needs to be changed, make those changes. Test the new plan with the changes. You want to constantly keep doing this. Just as plans need to be frequently updated, you want to make sure you're doing your training on your plans and you're testing and exercising them on a regular basis as well. All right, so final slide, next step. So you're looking to create your own continuity of operations plan. Again, highly recommend you go to ready.gov. That is where all this information comes from. But they also have something called the Business Continuity Planning Suite. And that's what I have a screenshot of here. This is a tool that'll walk you through generating a plan. It has things specifically looking at IT recovery, and it'll help you design exercises for your plan. That is essentially my presentation. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them now.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was amazingly comprehensive. I definitely learned a lot, and I bet everybody else did too. Folks, just post your questions in the chat if you would like. We did have one question which Darren addressed, but maybe you'll have something to add. Justin asked, what resources does OEM provide to small businesses? And Darren mentioned ready.gov and conducting site visits to assist with determining the best location for sheltering, safety presentations, winter weather preparedness, and that kind of stuff. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, it's pretty comprehensive. So yeah, definitely check out ready.gov. And as Darren mentioned, if you need, someone to come and look at your building to see if you're looking for storm shelters or things like that, that is something we can help with. So you could just reach out to us. I believe my contact information will be posted here somewhere, but I know you mentioned that we're going to send out an email at the end of this, and it will definitely be included in that if anyone needs to reach out to us.
Perfect. Yeah, we will include your contact info. We're waiting to see if anyone else has questions. I had just a couple for you. So you mentioned revisiting kind of your continuity plan, and maybe also should you redo your business impact analysis periodically, or is there a recommendation for how frequently you revisit that?
Once you do the initial one, that should give you a pretty good basis for, moving forward, unless you have any major shifts in business. If you stay at kind of the same general scale that you usually operate at, and have small changes, definitely take those into account. But if it's anything that's big enough, like, providing a new service, or you start making a new good, you have a new branch, you have new materials that you have to get that you didn't have to do before, then it can help to do a business impact analysis again. Either redo the whole thing, for the sake of being thorough, or you can just focus on the areas that have changed or the things that have been added.
Gotcha. And then you mentioned after action reports. I wondered if you noticed or knew of anything on the ready.gov site that would sort of have like a guide for doing that, or like a worksheet or something, so you sort of know what questions to ask if you're new at this.
I am not sure if there's anything on ready.gov that specifically looks at after action reports. Again, they will help design your exercises, and that's a traditional facet of an exercise. But I haven't looked at it myself to see. I see that Aubrey's on here. He's actually our training and exercise specialist. So he's the one who does after action reports for our department.
Oh, sure.
So if he's still here, if he has any suggestions for sites, he is welcome to put that in the chat. But honestly, just kind of Googling an example of an after action report will probably give you a good place to start.
Great. Yeah, I think Aubrey's still on. Aubrey said major weaknesses found through exercise and SWOT analysis as well. Great. Good advice. I don't see any other questions. So we'll wrap it up since it's 3 o'clock. Again, we will send out that follow-up email that includes the recording of this session along with Katelyn's contact info if you need to reach out to the Office of Emergency Management. Katelyn, thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you for having me. It was really great.
Okay, we'll see everybody later. Bye-bye.